Hello and welcome to another BuildASoil FAQ episode. Today we have the first FAQ for season 5. We tried to pull questions that are relevant to this grow. Of course, we're just getting started, and I'm not the one that does it. Dean pulled all of the questions, and as per usual, I have no idea what any of the questions are. They're on this sheet, and it keeps it really candid. I'm just gonna open up the sheet. I'm gonna start reading. Let's jump into the first FAQ of season 5 right now. Arnolfo says, serious question, how did you move the 3x3 bed? How many people did you need? I needed to move mine to do flooring, laugh out loud. That's pretty funny. So I needed to move it, and it was clear because we wanted to keep it for the plans for the quadrant, and immediately I was like, oh man, that's gonna be a pain. And so I let it dry down just a little bit. I mean, quite a bit, but it still holds so much moisture in there that the worms were still in the bottom. There was still moisture in the middle. So we didn't let it go bone dry. Probably had a normal amount of water. It probably had 60, 70% less than what I would call normal, but it still had moisture in there. And I would grab the side and I felt like, man, 2 of us could probably move this. So we grabbed 3 people, myself and 2 others. And I had to move it out of the tent and like carry it through and around, and it was a little bit awkward based on the pole and the zipper and the door and everything. So 2 would have been almost impossible based on that. 4 would have made it like cakewalk, just grab it and everybody walk. So 3, totally doable. Only made strange by the awkwardness of like extending and getting out of the tent. 4, it would have been super, super easy. In fact, we had to lift the 4x4, and I think we had 4 people to do that, and that was still hard. But 4 people for the 3x3, like no problem. So really good question. I'm glad that you asked. Okay, Jay, great episode. Any updates on the clones? Have you had to spray the cubes since the previous episode? Thanks in advance. Great question. I did. In fact, we came in there and I was kind of surprised because the cubes were dry when I got them. And, you know, I've gone through clone root riots and many different brands out there, right? That just basically the little chocolate brownie pucks. There's lots of brands out there. We've used many over the years. And I've had many experiences where sometimes they're dry, sometimes they're wet, sometimes there's white stuff on them. This one was a little weird. The bag was dry, so we re-moistened all of them and let it sit for a while. And like the first day I noticed there was like a white mycelium growing on them, and I kind of freaked out. And then the next day I decided just to leave it, right? Not freak out, just watch. And the next day we noticed 2 of them were just a little bit droopy. And I was like, oh my God, is that from the mycelium? I thought maybe not, they still look healthy. So then I felt, and they just felt dry. So I ended up not spraying them, but taking a cup of clean water, taking the clone out and dunking it and putting it back in. And they immediately stood right back up. So I knew it was just lack of water. And then it's been, I forget how many days now, but over the weekend, I was checking them on Sunday, which is checking on them yesterday. And I was like, on a Monday, and I was like, man, should I spray these or not? I said, I'll check first thing in the morning, because they didn't look like dry at all. They just looked like maybe they could be getting dry, but the humidity is super high in that dome. So I came in this morning and there was 2 just starting to droop a little bit. So instead of only isolating the ones that were droopy, I decided to dunk every single one of them to rehydrate and put it back in there. I hope we still get success. The plants still look good. I'm guessing we'll get rooting like always, but when there's a curveball in your system, like normally I don't have to re-moisten them, or normally there's not that white mycelium growing on them, I'm kind of like, fingers crossed, right? Good thing we have a whole bunch of extra cuts that we took off the mom plant, and I still have the mom plant. So while not everything goes perfect, like it should go to some sort of process. And if that process is the same every time, you should have some expected results. And so, man, it was a good question, because literally, normally I don't have to rehydrate them for quite a while. And something was up with these pucks as far as their moisture holding. So I'd say no matter what brand you use, you got to be on your toes, because, you know, after millions of these pucks are made. In fact, one of the other brands, before we switched to the Floraflex ones, there was actually a big issue where the production company put out too much glue in there in the binder. And that glue is actually what we're looking to avoid, because it never decays. And the ones we carry now, they actually break down. But that glue in particular, when it was added in extra, there was like thousands and thousands and thousands of clones that died at commercial facilities because they had an exact process. And when that puck changed, it sent them for a loop. Now, other facilities were able to still root in those pucks, but it's because they adjusted their process based on the moisture. So really, really good question. Also, Jay, we will update you on the clones. Not part of this FAQ, but in the coming videos, of course, we're gonna provide all the updates and show you what they look like. All right, next one, Dan. How do you re-amend your earth boxes normally? Are you top dressing more in the middle of the cycle or the beginning? I usually mound pretty heavy as I'm going into flower, because I've kind of, at that point, I have an idea of how big the plant is in veg versus when it's gonna flip to flower and double in size. One of my strategies with a container of soil being big is that I want the plant to be smaller than the container. And when I flip to flower, that leaves fresh new soil for those roots to dig in. And what they say is as above, so below. And so when you know your plant's about to explode with canopy growth in the first 2 weeks of flower, we should be visualizing the same root growth explosion down below. And if we're already root bound, that won't happen. And that'll limit your upward growth and your yield on the top side. So in the earth box, since it's a little bit smaller, one, I try not to over veg them. But two, if I realize it's a pretty big plant for an earth box, one of the benefits is it has the water reservoir down below. It can kind of trick those roots into getting some expansion. But I also want to take care of the feeder roots up top. So I definitely like to mound or top dress heavy when it comes to the earth box mid-cycle. Now, oftentimes what that does, because I've stacked it so heavy, is it leaves me where it's mounded up pretty thick. And when I go to harvest, my next cycle that I want to actually plant, I look at it and I'm like, man, that's a big mound in there. If I was to no-till this, I should probably scrape that. So what I do is I scrape that mound off to make it flat, and I put that stuff into the worm bin, and then I plant. And because I just scraped a whole bunch off and I planted again, normally I sprinkle a small top dress right at that point. That's it, just to guide it to the point where I'm almost to flower, and I remound it. So my schedule is I put just enough in there, a little sprinkle of craft blend just to kind of train the feeder roots, maybe a little worm castings, not a huge mound. Then as I get closer to flower, I judge based on plant size. If it's way too big, I'll stack inches in a mound to give it that space. And then when I go to harvest, I'll scrape it, I'll replant it, I'll put a small top dressing to reignite the soil, and then I kind of gauge it halfway through. If I end up flipping to flower pretty quick, I might just do a really light top dress halfway through. If I end up getting a big plant that I kind of overgrew, then I'm going to be maybe doing one, if not two top dresses on the earth box. The good news is it's pretty forgiving because the top dressing is done on top and it always has clean water under. And so don't be too critical of yourselves, but make sure that you have that time release in mind. Like the second you top dress a big mound, it's not going to get access to all that to the new feeder roots growing there. And so that could take a week or two. And so that's why I like to put most of my top dressing before I go into flower or right at flower. So I'm not halfway through flower going, oh no, I should have added more, right? So that's kind of the whole answer in a nutshell. Okay, next one, John. John says, how much of the bag of top dress compost did you use in the 3x3 bed, and how much does the bag cost? I think he's talking about this BuildASoil that I used right here. And you can see I've got half the bag left. And that is $60 for one of those, and it's free shipping. It's heavy, and so a lot of that is obviously the free shipping cost. And so really on a budget, you can go find some local compost and some amendments. That's always what we preach. But then just like other things, we're busy in life. And so I just grab that and bring it home. A lot of our customers, they'd like to do the same. You don't have to buy multiple bags and mix them together yourselves. So for 60 bucks, and I'm gonna just guess a little high. I used just under a third of the bag because there's still half left, and it was already used before that. So let's say I spent 20 bucks using a third of the bag on the BuildASoil for the 3x3, plus the amendments that I added. Pretty good for a cycle since it's on its 5th cycle. That's part of the benefit, is the phantom value, so to speak. Because when you're buying the soil, you're like, geez, this is a lot. And then the tent and the grow light and all the stuff. But pretty soon you're smoking for free. And then sooner than that, 5 cycles deep, you're not buying any more soil and very few inputs. So it's pretty rad. Good question. I like it. I would like to, at some point, focus on those metrics more. I think it'd be great to say this is exactly what we spent, but it is a lot of math and things change over time. So if someone watches this video in 5 years, numbers could be different. So we're trying to be cognizant of that as well. All right, Jones, the green growth on the soil, what is it? I had the same on mine using seedling soil as a threat to the babies. I just want to learn. You know, in my experience, any seedling soil that I've used, ours or anyone else, it grows that. Now, our BuildASoil Light 3.0, it's less likely, and I feel like it's probably because of the texture to it and the chunkiness to it, and there's less area for it to grow on. But what happens when there's the Pro Mix in there, maybe from the perlite, I'm not positive, but it's the only soil that it does it on, and all the other seedling soils, it's from the light. So the way to avoid it is just put a little mulch. I like to use the Blue Oyster straw mulch, whatever you'd like, and you just put a little thin layer on there so that the seedling can pop through. That blocking of the light stops the algae from growing. And the algae has not been detrimental in my experience. But what I've noticed is that it can be an indicator that maybe it's a little bit too wet. However, I've noticed seedling soil, whether it's ours or any type, even when I was like starting veggie seeds before I really got into growing, I'd be like, what is all this stuff growing on there from my grow light and starting peppers and stuff? And it's algae. And algae by itself is not terribly bad. It didn't affect us negatively. We got a pretty good germination on this last round, although there were a few seeds that didn't germ. I can't relate it to the algae because there was one with a lot of algae on it that popped late, and it's doing really well right now. And so when I have like exceptions to the rule, I'm like, that can't be it, because it's proven that seeds didn't care about the green algae. So just my 2 cents. That's partially why we've always just used BuildASoil Light for the longest time for sprouting seeds, but then you'd have customers saying, hey, do you have anything without the big chunks of pumice in there? And I'm starting a 50 cell tray with tomatoes, what do I use? So honestly, the seedling soil is really to fill those needs. I personally just like to use BuildASoil Light, but also I like to show on camera many different things. You'll recall in that video, I referenced that I'd recently just started a whole bunch of seeds in 3.0 soil and had 100% success and no green growth. So take that for what it's worth. I just want you to keep learning. In my book, green algae is not gonna kill the seeds, but it's less than ideal. I would prefer if it never existed. So I also think that the light and the dome in particular where we had it, a little bit more prone, where when it's in the black cups and the soil's a little lower and maybe there's not a dome on, it may not have done it so bad, but that green growth, man, it drives me crazy as well. Okay, sprout, shouldn't living soil always be ready to plant? Not really seeing why you should wait for amendments to break down in order to plant a seed. Oh, this is a good question. It is always ready to plant. And in fact, you'll see in the 3x3, if I were to show you, the clover is just banging still. It's not like my top dress hurt the plant. But one of the things that you'll notice is if you do a good top dress, you'll raise the temperature of that top 2 inches of soil. There will be some thermal activity when you do a heavy top dressing. Putting a fresh seed right into that could be a problem. And the last thing I want to do is teach someone something that, like if we're just talking about tomato seeds, I'd be like, yeah, just throw them in there and see what happens. In fact, put 2 or 3 per hole. But when someone goes and spends all the money to get 3, 4, 5 feminized seeds of a particular variety, and I'm like, yeah, just huck them in the big bed of soil and see what happens. There's more variables that can come into play. And so a lot of people use like the rooting pucks just to start their seeds so that they have full control. And then they put those into the soil. There's lots of methods for doing this, but my reasoning is that I don't have the seeds yet. So I was thinking, okay, put the amendments down. That buys me time for that to sort of assimilate into the soil. Realistically, had I had regular seeds, not autoflower, and started them in a cup, I'd be comfortable transplanting those and top dressing the same day. It might provide a little warmth on top of the soil, not enough to really hurt the plant. But germinating sensitive, expensive seeds, I want to be very careful not to teach things that might work, but might have a lower chance of working, especially when you don't have the experience to kind of decide for yourself. So I hope that answers your question. Some of the things that I teach aren't exactly what I would do myself, but what I mean by that is it's taking into consideration that I'm teaching a wide variety of growers, from brand new to experienced. The experienced ones, they know what to do. I'm really trying to teach fundamentals, and occasionally I'll say, hey, you can do this, you can do that. But I don't want to just be completely ignoring the fact that you amend a whole bunch, it gets a little warm, you put some expensive seeds in there and they don't all germinate. I'd be frustrated. So that's what it is. I just wanted to let you know. So thank you, really good question. Also, reconnecting to this, huge arguments on the forum back in the day. When we would mix up the Coots recipe, we'd be like private messaging each other, like, Microman, so-and-so says I have to hook up this soil and let it sit for 2 weeks. Is that true? And Coots would be like, I don't know, I just mix it and plant into it. I don't know why you'd have to let any of it sit. But the whole cooking first came from super soil, which is loads of stuff, wider carbon to nitrogen ratio, and it would go 140, 150 degrees. You can't plant right into it. So both parties were right. Coots soil, you can plant right into. It had, kelp, crustacean, neem, nothing that was gonna go crazy in small amounts. But when you look at some of the other recipes, like even our 3.0, right now I took measurements off 3.0 today, 140 degrees. And that's 4 or 5 days after making it. There was big arguments on cook, no cook, is it ready to plant, is it always ready to plant? I feel like we should use our observations and go off what we understand and see, but not all no-till soil is exactly the same. And that's just more info because I wanted to share kind of everything behind the scenes. Gabriel, Jeremy, love the BAS shirt. Will you guys have them in stock? Yes, Gabriel, I'm glad you asked, and this is ridiculous, like I'm embarrassed. We're just trying to keep up with orders. And so as a small business, started out of my garage, there's a lot that we had to learn, logistics and computers, and we have so many SKUs, we have a full development team, we have multiple manufacturing departments, but we're still a small business. And so one of the things that got away from us was the swag, the gear. And we're like, okay, let's just focus on good soil, who cares, we'll come back to that project. So a couple months ago, we decided, hey, it's time, let's get some shirts. And in any case, long story short, we only wanted organic cotton. We sent it to a supplier that printed them on non-organic and then stuck us with the bill. And we decided, what do we do? He's sitting on a whole bunch of our shirts with our logos on them. They're not organic. Maybe we'll just sell them and then we'll add the organic version later. And then we got the box of them in the mail and I opened it up and there was like a difference in color on some of the extra larges and XXLs, like they'd blown up the image and not gotten it quite right. And by itself, it's not terrible, but next to the proper one, they don't look the same. And so now we're like, okay, do we give some of these away? Do we like do a discounted sale on just these sizes? Then in inventory, how do we differentiate? This is a misprint, this is not a misprint. We're almost through it. And then after we get through this batch of printed t-shirts, we're gonna switch over to one of the one-off printers. They do a great job now. We've actually been testing a lot of them. The one I was wearing most recently was from one of these printers. We're not gonna just add the product to the website. We're actually requesting the prints. I got a coffee mug with the print and it was printed slightly off, so we're adjusting it. Once we're confident that we like the quality, we like exactly how it's printed, we're gonna add it to the website. And the good news with this is there'll be multiple colors, multiple sizes, and multiple types of gear. And the next step is we also wanna add the BuildASoil Family Farms logoed out gear, because right now, BuildASoil has been basically charity sponsoring the 2 pigs that we have, and we've rescued them. And they cost a lot of money to feed and maintain, to the point where the farm does not make profit and it couldn't support it. And so between my wife and I, were thinking, is there any way that we can make sure these pigs just live the best life without having to put a burden on the business when sometimes it's expensive? And we really have other projects, like we need to buy inventory. We've got lots of employees to pay. And so we decided we'll get the gear up, and then any of the sales that go to the BuildASoil Family Farms gear will support feeding the pigs. So more important things right now, we're in the middle of busy season and we are back ordered on soil, and we're a soil company. So I like to say we didn't run out, we sold out, and we're doing well, but it hurts. Like as a business owner, you don't want to be in that situation, but we also make quality, so I can't rush it. And it kind of is what it is. So we're gonna walk through getting caught up. By the end of the month, we will be. And in that better state, we're gonna use that time to launch all of the gear. And I'm hoping for a hat. I ordered a camo hat with a logo, and the logo looked terrible on it. So I'm like revisiting that. But you can tell, it's something I really wanna do, and we're actively working on. That's why I'm kind of just dumping here. So I really appreciate you asking. Sprout. All right, yet another one, Sprout. So everyone else has aloe, but not the Vera? Oh, that's funny. So no, most people do have aloe vera. Like when you just see a plant, typically that's the Barbadensis Miller. That's the typical one that you see the photo of, and it has a certain color flower, and that's the one. But when you see Aloe Ferox or all these other types of aloes, when you get aloe collectors, they know all the different varieties. Those aren't aloe vera. And I used to think they were all aloe vera, but there was Aloe Vera Ferox, aloe vera like so-and-so down the line. Turns out the vera was actually the specific. And then it confused me more that the aloe vera is the Barbadensis Miller. And you'll see this a lot. Like when you go into the houseplant world, somebody's like, well, that's a wandering Jew, or, you know, that's a money tree. And you're like, well, that's a money tree. You're like, well, that's also a money tree, but I called it. And you're like, oh, come on, can we get the names straight? I feel like it's pretty normal in the plant world, just something that happens. So I feel like most people have aloe vera. And some companies out there and some plants out there are not aloe vera. And it was just an interesting fact that I'd mentioned. I forget when, maybe one of the first episodes. Garcia. Hi, I was wondering what would be considered a feeding, if you will, in living soil. A top dress or a tea? I feel like anytime we're adding anything outside the loop of that container of soil, we're feeding. And so in talking even to my wife, she'll be like, oh, I fed at the farm today. I'm like, really, you fed? What'd you use? She's like, oh, some root wise and some aloe. I'm like, I mean, this is more like you're hooking them up. I'm not really feeding them, right? Because just coming from hydro, I'm like, a feed is like full. It's like everything that you would need, full spectrum, right, to feed the plants. Where I feel like what happens in living soil is we're trying to keep things on an even keel. And if you think of all of what's in the soil, like as the savings account, if you ever notice you're getting a little low and you need to do a transfer to checking, so to speak, to keep things running, that's the feed. You're just like keeping nutrient cycling going. So when we first started living soil, a lot of times we're in smaller containers. So guys were using lots of compost tea. And you're getting nutrients in the compost tea, but also if you got it right, our consideration was that we're releasing millions, if not billions, of bacteria and different types of biology in there. That biology would then release into the soil and eat all the food that's not available to the plant and make it available in a nutrient cycling frenzy. And so the idea of even feeding a tea or microbes still being a feeding kind of holds true in the sense that you're almost putting lighter fluid on the fire, and the byproduct is you're going to burn more wood. So in the soil, if you're giving something that stimulates and it eats more food because of it, you're almost like you're feeding. But in living soil, we're really not trying to feed the plant, we're trying to feed the soil. And the difference there is that when you have a chelated chemical salt, it has no carbon in it, and it's literally available for uptake to the plant. Where when we're doing a tea or when we're doing like a liquid fish, a lot of it's gonna linger and feed the soil for a long time in the future. And so we're more building the soil. And I'll liken it like this. Setting up your living soil is like getting the bonfire going for the party. You don't want to light all the wood on fire at once. You just want to get it to a certain temperature where people are happy and add one piece of wood at a time, maybe two. Once we get our big living soil container going, the whole goal is for me not to deplete it down to zero by growing such a big plant and never top dressing that when I harvest, I'm at square one again when I have to do my next cycle. That's kind of like re-amending. I have to dump it back out, re-amend it all, put it back in the container. Instead, when we're going to no-till, let's say on a scale of 0 to 100 is our nutrients. 100 is like it's primed, it's ready to plant into, and it's loaded, and you're just putting your plant into it. Throughout that entire cycle, I maybe want to get it as low as 50%, but not lower. And since we're going to be going for round after round after round after round in perpetuity, really the first cycle is the only weird one, where you're like, what do I do? It's got so much stuff in it. Do I not top dress? Is it too much? Do I feed? But really by your second cycle, we should be on this standard process where we're just adding a little top dressing and then we're also reading the plants. And so in the 10 by 10, to keep things looking good, a lot of times what I do is, obviously we have the BuildASoil schedule, but when you're walking in there and you just are vibing with your plants and you can see that they've been growing quite a bit and you know flowers coming soon, you can feed them in different ways to kind of just give them something. Whether it's a foliar spray or just a light tea or top dress, that's keeping it in that window of 0 to 100. We're not overdoing it. We're not feeding the plant to excess and causing burn. We're just keeping it so the soil has a little bit of pressure taken off of it. Where normally you would depend 100% water only on the soil, when we give little bits of things from time to time, we're just making it slightly easier for these plants to get what they need without having to fully go through the biological process. So like one, for instance, is amino acids. It's so easy for the plant to access that it kind of relieves some of the pressure off of what would normally have to happen microbially in the soil through lots of effort. So I hope that helps answer your question. When I first started, guys were feeding like compost teas every single watering. And I feel like going to bigger soil really reduced that to the point where people started doing true water only. And from there, after doing lots of water only, you realize, man, maybe it'd be better if I did little bits of top dressing and little bits of feeds so that I didn't completely deplete my soil between rounds and you get the best of both worlds. So hopefully that helps answer your question. Okay, last one on here. Mr. Van. Love the channel, love the addition to the series with the tropical tent, especially the coffee plants. Being a coffee lover myself, what coffees do you prefer to drink regularly? Death Wish coffee has been my go-to for a couple of years now. Have you tried it? What are your thoughts? You know, Death Wish, I think I've had it like once, but I swear, like I'm big into marketing and I'm pretty sure, I could be wrong, I think Death Wish is the one that's like strongest coffee. I don't want the strongest, I want the loudest, I want the terpiest, I want the most flavor. I don't care about the caffeine content. You can tell by some of my videos that I definitely consume caffeine. I would use the AeroPress. We sell them here. I actually use them for coconut oil infusions and other filtering. But I would literally make every single day. In fact, here at the office, that's all I use, the AeroPress. And I have a couple rules. I want a good organic coffee, and my preferences change. Here at the office, we usually get like a lighter roast, Ethiopian or breakfast blend or something that has lots of caffeine and is generally just easy for everyone to drink. At home, I have quite a variety that I go through because I just like to change it up. I need to have a good grinder. So we bought a good grinder in here and an AeroPress, and now I feel like I have really good coffee almost no matter what bag it is. But at home, if I take one of those Ethiopians that I kind of like the blueberryness and like the acidity to it, and I run it through the espresso machine, it is disgusting. So I've played like I have flow control and you can get it to taste a little bit better. But at home, Kevin Rootwise turned me on to the Silver Bullet, but I think it's a different, maybe it's a different one for the organic version. But my caveat is, since I drink so much coffee, I like 99% of it's gonna be organic. Occasionally they just won't have a good selection at the grocery store and I'll try something else. But for something I consume daily, I don't want it to be laden in chemicals. I feel like it's just too much exposure because I drink it every single day, multiple cups. So I try and get a good organic bag of coffee that's fresh. Heck, at the farmer's market, they've got a really good roaster and he's got one particular blend that I like a lot. But when it comes to the espresso machine, that Silver Bullet that Kevin turned me on to and other ones that I've liked, they have a really chocolatey taste. And so it might be slightly darker than I would normally get when I was just on the AeroPress, but when I run it and pull it through the espresso machine, it tastes like chocolate and it tastes so good. And I only drink coffee black, so I really like it when that happens. Those are kind of my preferences. As far as brands, I'm not really beholden to any one brand other than that one, which I'm terrible. I buy like the 5-pound bags of it and it's been a little while. I've been just going with the stuff at the grocery store. So I'll try and look it up and comment in here on what the one is that Kevin referred me that's the Silver Bullet, because it's a Colorado roaster. And occasionally I just go to their website and order another 5-pound, 10-pound bag. Kind of more than I wanted to talk about coffee, but I really appreciate you dropping it in here. The coffee plants, I'll have to do another tropical tent update. They're doing really well. We had some pests that came in through, I think, some of the other plants that we ordered online. And so we're really just making sure that it doesn't transfer over here, and I've been neglecting that because the farm's going crazy and we're busy. So pretty soon, in the next couple of weeks, we'll have a good tropical tent update and show you how much things have grown. It's crazy how fast things grow in an ideal environment. So we will show you the coffee plants. They are doing well. I have no idea how many beans I'll get out of it or how it'll actually work. And they are Arabica because it was easy to get those coffee plants. And so this will be the first. I'm sure once we end up getting some beans of any sort and roast them, it may not even be very good, but I'm hoping it kind of lights a fire where maybe I can get more and more coffee plants and actually have a really good go at it someday. Who knows, maybe someday I'll live on an island and this will be just practice so I can have thousands of coffee plants, right? That could be the dream. So thank you everyone for asking these questions. Makes it a really good part of the series for me because when we're strapped for time, the desire is to go in there and answer everybody's question in YouTube. But I've got a family and we've got kids and we've got multiple employees and we've got a lot going on. And I'm trying to get that work-life balance and make sure that I'm tending to everything it's supposed to. And so the ability to do an FAQ, know that we're answering some questions for everyone to hear, not just the person that asked the question, really makes me feel like we're doing something valuable. So thank you for asking these questions. Thanks for being a part of our BuildASoil YouTube series. I really think season 5 is going to be a great one. So if you haven't done so already, subscribe. It'll give you the updates because a lot of our videos get age restricted. But the second I show a plant, it's like the AI sees a plant and it shuts us down. And so for that reason, I'm going to ask you to subscribe. Also, tell your friends about this. It'll help them grow fire so that they can share with you. And that abundance is what we're looking for. Thanks again. And until the next episode, I'll see you guys on the next BuildASoil YouTube video.